So what does it mean to us on this forum? Will ChatGPT actually minimize the human interaction that we have and the whole process of teaching and learning? How does it and will it in fact disrupt traditional ways of teaching? So these are all important questions for us to think about. Like I said, ChatGPT and its future versions are here to stay. We'll get to this question again later on. But yeah, so let's before we go into ChatGPT specifically, we'll compare and contrast this with other type of applications, software applications that we come across in our day-to-day lives. There are traditional web-based applications, for example, ticket booking or internet banking, or the news websites that we browse every day, and the internet search engines. And then, of course, we are talking about ChatGPT. Now, central to all of this are pretty much any software application, even the types of applications not covered there. If you just take a desktop application, if you're just looking at a spreadsheet application or even a word processor, if you say open Microsoft Word or LibreOffice Writer, whatever you type in is essentially data, right? It's going to store it in some format, but on your own system. So those are desktop applications. Mobile applications, each application actually has its own database, a very structured database that any mobile application developer has to create and install it along with your mobile app and install it from the App Store. So data is central, whatever application you're dealing with. But what kind of, not even what kind of data, but how the data is produced, how it is consumed and processed, that makes all the difference. Right? So in perspective, in the context of ChatGPT, it does not have intelligence in the sense that we understand intelligence, human intelligence and so on. It basically works with data, but in a way that these other types of applications don't. If you take traditional web application, there is 3 examples I have given here. If it's a train booking system, you have structured data that has certain information that you need to book a ticket. Or if it is a banking application, it has information about your account number, the bank balance, and what type of account it is, and so on. Or news websites have the other example that I've shown here. They are also, any news website you go to, they operate on a database. So there is a database where they feed in through a different application, the news articles and so on. And that's what we see on the browser. Right? So invariably, they all have structure behind them. They're mostly tabular data that you can fit in. The entire content of a news article actually fits into a database. And the data itself, the way it changes based on user interactions. And there's an important concept here, which is garbage in, garbage out. Some of you may have heard the acronym GIGO. There's garbage in, garbage out. It's a fundamental principle to software because these are not sentient, intelligent beings, and they work with data and understand data very mechanically based on rules that we create. If you give garbage data, it's going to respond in foolish ways. That's one way of putting it. So or it's going to give you garbage back. So if the people who maintain the IRCTC website, if tomorrow they go and change in the database a particular train that today the source is Bengaluru and say the destination is say Calicut, and they just change the destination to New Delhi, that's what you're going to see the next day. And that's it basically. So you feed it wrong information, you're going to get wrong information back. Now, search engines use data differently, but the same principles of garbage in, garbage out comes in. So we'll just first understand how search engines work. They don't have data of their own. So if you're searching for something, it basically pulls data from different sources. But it doesn't pull data, unlike a typical traditional application, it does not have a database where based on what you're asking, it's going to its database and coming back with information. it relies on the internet to create its own database. So it goes through what's called crawling. It basically goes over every single website that it has access to on the internet and scans the content there, because nobody can really prevent a search engine from accessing a website if it is publicly available. So it will go there, it will analyze your content, it will look at keywords there, it will generate keywords, it will look at your URLs and create its own database of searchable content. So when you're looking for content, it's actually going into its own built-up database and giving it to you. But it's also able to give you late breaking news, something that happened an hour ago. So how that happens is, based on this crawling all of these websites over time, it understands how often websites change, what kind of websites they are. Depending on how frequently they change, it changes its frequency of crawling those websites and getting content from them. There is still a time lag. So if a news website publishes some breaking news now and it's the only website on the internet that has published it, you won't get it immediately in your Google search. But in a little bit of time, depending on how often Google is searching that site, it's going to come back with. So if that happens to be fake news, garbage, you're going to see that. So basically, again, that's what I meant when I said garbage in, garbage out. If there are 1,000 websites that say one thing about a particular topic and one website that says something else, it's very likely you're going to see one of those 100 listed, and this 101st either may appear very late in the search or may not even appear in your search. And the kind of content that it scans, it's very different. Text and images, you can search on images and PDFs and so on. And they use their own proprietary algorithms to show what should be the very first result. Right? So that's what it does. And the commercial aspect here comes in. You see paid links coming up on top sometimes. These are companies which have paid Google to show their links on top first. There have been cases in the US Supreme Court and so on, where Google has tried to take advantage, commercial advantage, things like that. You can read. Yeah, so this is basically what we saw earlier about penguins, and there's a search on order in which the search results are displayed. So what we just discussed. Now, how does ChatGPT use data? Like I said, it doesn't connect to the internet. So how does it actually provide you this information? It does not have a database of questions. It does not have this concept of intents and keywords like we saw with the simpler chatbots. The way ChatGPT has been developed is that it has had a download of a very large number of website content from website. At least since it's proprietary information, we don't know everything about it. But from the published information from OpenAI, they're saying it has gone through most of the internet, and it has downloaded all of that content, text data, because it's a chat application. At least at this point, they're saying it has downloaded text data. And this plain text data, 500 GB is actually a lot. They're saying more than 500 GB. And it has looked at all of this. So these are words and sentences that it comes across on millions of websites. It has formed patterns of structures of word formations and sentence formations. If you have a certain set of words, what word actually appears after that given a set of words? There are statistical algorithms that help with this. You may have seen this with Google autocomplete, email autocomplete as well. It tries to give you suggest words. That's based on what it has seen with other people typing and across the internet, how sentences are structured and so on. So there are a lot of statistical patterns of words and sentences. It has formed out of these billions and billions of words that it has downloaded from the internet. There is context to it. There is a concept of natural language processing, which allows us to identify, if given a line of text, say the cat sat on the mat, it can identify cat and mat as nouns and what action actually happened there and who performed that action on whom. It can understand adjectives, adverbs, so grammatical constructs. So all of this is pretty standard natural language processing that has been there for several years. So it can do all of that. Now on top of that, there are newer things that have happened. There are now things called transformer algorithms, which allow it to identify relationships between entities in ways that was not possible before. And there is something called large language model training, which again use probability and statistics to predict next word. So when it sees a bunch of words, it knows what's going to come next. And generative algorithms. So that's a big development in the last few years, because that's what makes it generate responses of its own, which look like something that has been originally written. These algorithms basically are again probabilistic models. It looks at structures of sentences and creates equivalent or similar sequences of words based on existing sequences that it has already seen. So there is a simplification I'm doing here. This set of 3 or 4 items here I'm covering years of research, but essentially this is what it does. Now based on this, earlier versions of ChatGPT were still not satisfactory, but they introduced a level of human supervision to this based on the responses it gives. They said this is okay, this is not okay. They gave it several hundred labelers, as they call them, have worked on the responses and told it what is good, what is not good. And based on that, it has understood certain patterns and tries to imitate those kind of patterns more often than not. So you will actually see structure, that initial preamble that it gives, that comes out of those sort of patterns that it has understood to be good ways of writing essays and so on. Now in this, there's a side question. I don't want to go into this in detail, but it's something for us to think about. If you have ever contributed any content on the internet, say, a blog post, or written an article somewhere, or contributed to Wikipedia, those are your copyright, although not Wikipedia entry, but if you contribute an article, that's your copyright. I don't think OpenAI actually asks for your permission to reproduce your content somewhere. And if they do, should they actually be paying you a share of their profits? Because your content has actually gone into improving ChatGPT. But these are questions to think about. Now already, like a couple of participants already said, there are some limitations. And the problem of garbage in, garbage out exists here equally. All the content that it has downloaded, it understands it in a certain way, and that's all it's going to use to respond to you with. So if there are things like colonialism never mentioned in the context of poverty on the internet, and we can guess probably why, then it's not going to show up in their response, right? Although it is a very valid aspect to consider. Now, if you look at, there is a lot of information production, asymmetry in information production on the internet, especially if you're talking about English internet. Websites, US-based production of content is very high. European probably is very high. From Africa, Asia, the representation is less. So then no wonder you don't get to see colonialism when we talk about poverty. So these are important aspects. There are several other things that go in as well, right? Historical, socioeconomic factors, geographic, and whose views get projected on the internet more. Those sort of websites get crawled more. So those are all things that go into feeding ChatGPT itself, and the responses, although they look mature and very confident, when we delve deeper into it, we definitely find, actually what's striking is what is not there in the responses. And then the human aspect to this. I mentioned these labelers who actively participate in training ChatGPT, saying what is good and what is not good. They obviously bring in their own biases. And if there are 100 of them working on this to develop the software, what kind of subjectivity is going into rewarding ChatGPT for what it said as a it created an essay. No, these are 100 different people, right? They have their own opinions also, although they may discuss among themselves and go in and evaluate these essays. As teachers, no two teachers probably agree exactly with the paper that you evaluate. So those kind of biases will build in here as well. And the thing to think about is all of them are working within a commercial enterprise that has a profit motive. So what are the things that they say are okay, that are not okay? We don't know. It's not transparent to us. So one example of content bias here. So I just asked a question relating to food and where can I get food and so on. It's come up with this response. If you look at some of these, things like food banks, soup kitchens, and the SNAP program, these are all concepts, especially the SNAP program is a program by the US government. And food banks and soup kitchens, we don't identify with that in India at least. And things like when it says reach out to community centers and churches, the kind of content that has gone into it for it to be able to generate this content. There are other limitations. There is something called a tendency to hallucinate. It's just a very fancy term to hide the fact that these are mistakes. Right? So factually incorrect information that comes out sometimes, and there is irrelevant content. Some of you already mentioned that it's not able to be accurate in some cases. Now, I just want to quickly go to an article that a freelance writer called Harry Guinness wrote about ChatGPT recently after working with it. Because it gives us insights into how ChatGPT internally processes things. So before you go there, Harry Guinness actually asked ChatGPT to write a brief resume about Harry Guinness himself in a few words. So just a few sentences. And Harry Guinness has written for several websites. He has contributed content, and his CV is there in many websites and so on. So he wanted to understand how ChatGPT is going to respond. So this is how it responded, the top box that you see. He's a freelance writer, blah, blah, and it says he has written for the New York Times, Guardian, Huffington Post, he covers topics, blah, blah. Right? It seems very nice, except that the underlying portions are actually not true. So how did it manage to get these three wrong? New York Times, he definitely writes. And Popular Mechanics especially, he has written articles for something called, I forget the name, Popular something else, but it is saying Popular Mechanics. How did this happen? So he and a few others tried to investigate this, and what they found is, on the internet, the term New York Times is often followed by these names, the Guardian, the Huffington Post, Popular Mechanics. Very often. Right? So it does not have, after New York Times, the 2 or 3 news media sites that he has worked with, like the Irish Times and so on. So it has not really looked at his own versions of resumes. It has gone by the keywords and the text that it has digested, and these are all statistical patterns. So after New York Times, it believes that the word, the phrase "the Guardian" should come, Huffington Post should come, and that's what it has done. Which is wrong, plainly wrong. He has never written for the Guardian or the Huffington Post. So this gives you an idea of what it's actually doing internally. It's all patterns of text that it has digested. So this idea of hallucination, what it does, is probably a very, if not the single biggest aspect that's problematic, because you start wondering, is it reliable at all? But definitely they're making progress there to minimize this kind of inaccuracies, or at least detect it and flag it to the human user when it occurs. So that is work in progress, I believe. There are other limitations. Like I said, it doesn't access the internet, and the data that it has been used to train ChatGPT is from 2021, at least the current version of ChatGPT. You can see an example here. Day before I asked the question, who's the president, it still says Ramnath Kovind. But immediately ask what is today's date, and it gives the right date. Right? So it doesn't have the concept of time and past and present. It says his term will end on in 2022, but it knows, or rather knows in double quotes, today's date is so and so in 2023. The other big issue is, especially on research topics where open-ended essay questions, it makes very strong statements, but you don't get a reference, and it is not possible by design for it to refer to, give you a reference to sources, because it digested information from so many sources. So a particular sentence that comes out of it, it's making it up based on what it has digested. So it cannot give references to sources. Maybe someday it change, but right now it does not. There is an environmental aspect. These sort of applications require a lot of energy, hundreds of servers that are running. Apparently, there are more than 1,000 servers that are running ChatGPT. And in general, running AI over the last decade has been very, very energy intensive. So ChatGPT's strengths we have discussed previously, all that it can do and all that people have tried to use it for, and all the limitations as well. But we need to remember that these are only very initial days. In fact, we have seen how internet has progressed over the last 10, 15 years. So we should keep that in mind when we say there are limitations. It's probably a matter of time before many of these limitations go away, and it keeps getting better in terms of its ability to produce content, respond to questions. And we have to keep in mind it's already performing very, very impressively. It's mind-boggling. That's the word I have for it. Having worked in this sector, seeing how Siri and Google Assistant all behaved so far, this just makes it's a completely new game that it is playing. Already ChatGPT is available for commercial use. People can interact with, companies can build applications connecting to ChatGPT in the backend. Applications are being developed. Like I said, Microsoft Bing is already, in fact, using on a test basis ChatGPT. Very soon we'll have learning apps, question and answer apps, and so on that will start coming out.